art activism means two things to me. Well, the first one is that I use art to campaign for social justice causes that I care about. And the second definition is that I campaign for art kind of as an act of rebellion and as freedom of expression, the same way that I would advocate for social justice. Probably the best answer is that I've always been one of those people who's underrepresented. I'm a queer woman, and you don't see a lot of queer people in the media, like actually behind the scenes producing TV shows about queer women. You know, you don't see them publishing books as much as you see like stereotypical characters, like the token lesbian character. So I've always been attracted to kind of helping other people who have trouble getting their voice out there. I'm going to give two answers, like in general terms and in publishing. In publishing, I think it would mean that there's just more women at the top who are putting out the things that everyone's reading, like at the big six publishers, you know, Simon & Schuster, Scribner. If they would have more copy editors, more people on their marketing team, more agents who were women or who were queer or who were black, I think that's a good start for better representation. So I'd just like to see more women kind of controlling what gets put out there in publishing. And in general, I just think that gender equality means that women should be, you know, not have different expectations than men have in society. Definitely. Gender equality for me is not just about feminism. I don't agree with people who say that feminism is the wrong word. Feminism is a perfectly okay word for it because it's not a bad word to label men with, you know, because men should be allowed to have feelings that are considered feminine. And one of the big criticisms that people make of gender equality is that, well, feminism doesn't care about men. And they do, you know, feminism, people who are advocating for feminism, we care about the fact that like a woman is almost always awarded custody over the father of the child. We care about the fact that men are prone to violence because they have to hold in their emotions. We care about that, and really no one else does. It's part of the agenda.
Okay.
Well, it's Blood Literary Magazine. It was founded in 2013 by a friend of mine who's also a Purdue Cal alum. Her name was Julie Larson. And I've been kind of a fan of it from the start. I joined the writing group here on campus right when Julie was about to launch this magazine. And so I have like the original little handmade postcards that she made when they were trying to get its name out there. And I was at the release party for the very first issue, and I went up and tried to read one of my poems, and I forgot it. Had a little bit of a meltdown. And this is their first print issue, the blue one I held up. And I got my hands on the very first one she took out of the box when she ordered the prints. I wrote a book review for her. I think I did some other work trying to help promote the magazine while she was still running it. And then in 2016, you know, everything just got to be a little too much for her. It is a big job running one of these because you don't make money from it. You put money into it, and it's long nights reading submissions that a lot of them suck, a lot of them are off topic, they violate the guidelines. And she was about to close up shop, and I just said to her, I can't let Blood Literature die. You know, it's become such an important community to me, and if it's so important to me, I think it must be really good for a lot of other people, and I want to keep it going. So I took it off her hands in 2016. I didn't really start taking submissions until 2017 because I was trying to get organized and get my life in order and make sure I had time for it. I took submissions starting last August, and we just put out our latest issue, which this is a print copy of an online-only issue. The print copy is only mine. It's not just something that everyone can buy, but it can be read for free. And this issue is themed about propaganda. it's something that's always on my mind, honestly. When I'm reading submissions, I don't know like who has submitted because our submission policy is blind. It means that I don't know who I'm reading unless I decide to accept them. Really, that's when I get to read the cover letter. We use a platform called Submittable, and it lets me set a blind setting. Like some of the settings are that if you're the top manager of the magazine, you can see who's submitting and delegate, the submissions to people who can't see the names of those who are submitting. It's an ethical thing, really, because like you have friends in the publishing community who might submit to your magazine, and you don't want to know whose writing you're looking at, because you can have accusations of bias, or some people who don't use blind submissions. Sometimes there is bias. I've gone on like a lit mag or a small press's website, and they'll have a disclaimer saying we publish people we know, we publish our friends. If you don't know us, you might not want to submit. There was one that I'm thinking of in particular, but we subscribe to a blind policy. So that's one of the things that we keep in consideration, is that we don't know who we're reading when we look at submissions. So we have to focus on attracting people from underrepresented backgrounds to submit to us and to read our magazine. Yeah, the group that we've assembled, all of us are very inclusive. We all consider ourselves allies, and I know that I personally am always trying to be a better ally. I'm always trying to listen when a person of color or someone who's trans, for example, tells me that a certain word or certain phrase is not okay, or they're telling me that a certain practice is problematic. I'm always trying to listen, even if it's new information to me. And I think that everyone on our staff is like that. Our staff is all women. It's 4 women, and 3 of us are queer. So we've got, I feel like we've got inclusive people reading the submissions, but for people who, don't know us and don't trust that on our agenda, they can know that we don't look at their names and see that they have a name that someone might interpret as it's a black sounding name or it's a Latino name. They don't have to worry about that. But also people who would claim that affirmative action is a bad thing and it could get in the way, those people can rest assured that I'm reading their submission the same way I read submissions by everyone else. That's a tough question, because the literary community and the art community, I think, is a major safe place for LGBT people. It's definitely one of the places I've always felt most at home, is when I'm in a gallery or when I'm at a poetry reading. But I do have to say, I've been to poetry readings where I was only listening to like bisexual, non-binary, and asexual people reading, and the room was just full of queer people, and that just feels great to me, because it's something very rare. I'm usually in a room full of straight people when I'm at these readings, and a lot of times I'm listening to a guy read a poem about, his girlfriend's vagina or something really ridiculous, or I'm hearing the word dick over and over in a man's poem, and it gets old, the heteronormativity. There's a lot of it, and there's a lot of straight people who are the ones publishing these magazines and books. Definitely, because like most of these big 6 publishers, if you look who their CEOs are, you look on their website, you see a lot of white people, you see a lot of old guys, and what I do is a lot different from what they do, but there are still problems in what we call the small press world, where these like small circulation magazines go around. There's harassment, and there's still a lot of a patriarchal structure in place. Read submissions blindly, but we try to make sure that we have a good number of submissions from people who are underrepresented by marketing to those people through I'll find a Facebook group of like LGBT slam poets, and I'll post my call for submissions there. I try to make sure that I'm getting the word out to underrepresented people. Well, there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes for a march and a protest. For anything, any organized demonstration, you know, you need people who are handling the PR. You need people to sometimes build a Facebook page and like monitor a social media following for, like, say, the March for Our Lives events that are going on everywhere. Not everyone can go to a march, especially people who have disabilities. You know, not all these marches are wheelchair accessible. Not all of them are inclusive enough, or just by the nature of protesting, it might not be an environment where someone, like, say, who has OCD or ADHD feels like they can function properly, but they can still help. They can help from wherever they are, and that applies for, you know, people like parents who can't get a babysitter for the night of the protest, and someone who has a class the night of the protest and they really don't want to miss it. You can create something that helps the movement. Like, you can be at a party for creating posters. Like, I know the March for Our Lives in Valparaiso, I'm planning to go to that, and the night before they're having a poster party. I would consider that art activism. If you go to that party, you start drawing posters for these people. Even if you can't make it to the protest, it's really important to have nice posters. It's important to have good PR. It's important to have people writing blogs and writing press releases, clarifying what your mission is. That's one part of it, I'd say. And I mentioned the other part of it is that I advocate for art the same way I would advocate for social justice causes. So art is just very undervalued in a lot of institutions, especially elementary schools. People are cutting funding for art classes, for music classes, and even at the schools that I went to, where none of that was ever cut, you know, there wasn't much poetry taught. They taught us the old dead white guys and their flower poems, and no one really liked that. And so I'm hoping to kind of diversify the way that people learn about art, the way that people learn about poetry and expression. And I want to make it something that everyone feels like they can be included in, and something that can help people. Yeah, definitely. I mean, just making a Facebook comment in support is a lot different than actually helping the movement by writing something for them or creating something for them. I will say one thing. There's something that happened recently in the small press community. Um, there's this poet. I'm not going to name him because I don't want to give him more press, but he was very problematic a few years ago. There was a journal that published a poem of his in which he threatened serious and disgusting bodily harm against another poet, and he didn't directly name her in this poem. And a lot of people were upset about it after it got published, and a lot of people told him, you know, it's fine. You can keep writing these poems. It's just art. It's free expression. And really, it was an intimidation tactic. And it's just so many men in the small press world didn't feel that this was a problem. In fact, one of my favorite magazines, a magazine that I really admired a lot, it's called Rattle. I will name them and I will shame them for this. I messaged the editor for that magazine, his name's Tim Green, and I told him that, hey, you published this guy a few years ago, and he's up to something now that you should know about. What he started doing, this poet, he created an Instagram account, and he started publishing poems in which he actually named female poets in the small press world that he just didn't like, with their names right on the poem, and described how he would like to very violently murder them or see them murdered. And there were so many people who were crying censorship at the women who were named in these poems who wanted them taken down. There were people crying censorship just at the thought of, like, saying that people should consider not publishing him because of that. And really, it was a threat. It was a threat disguised as a poem. And That's just not acceptable. I know that I would be just as upset about it. I don't want to go into detail about how disgusting the poems were, but it was really, really just unacceptable. No matter what, honestly, I think if you're talking about a person who's not named or not, I think it would have been inappropriate for a lot of publishing outlets. I mean, unless you happen to be publishing poetry that's kind of like slasher poetry or horror poetry, which does exist in the small press world. I'll note that for people who like that. There is a niche for that. The main thing is that people need to read more work by these individuals, and it's a constant struggle that I struggle with too. I see a book that I want to read, and I'm wondering, is the author a person of color? Is the author a woman? Is the author queer? I kind of have this joke that I take an affirmative action approach to writing, and I think a lot of people have a misconception about what affirmative action is, so I'm just going to kind of do an overview of that. Affirmative action doesn't mean that you just pick someone who's from an underrepresented group over people who are not from an underrepresented group. Affirmative action means you got two candidates, and one's black, for example, and one's white, and they have the same exact qualifications, and you're not sure which one you want to hire. You should take the person who's from a historically underrepresented background. It's very subjective. It has nothing to do with quotas. So my affirmative action approach to reading is that when someone, like, for example, I had someone recently recommend this book on fly fishing to me. I'm a big fisherman, and it was that book, A River Runs Through It, and I was like, I can find a book by a woman about fly fishing. I can find plenty of books about fishing that are not by Hemingway, that are by someone who's black, someone who's a woman on the water. I can find that. So, like, I would just like to see more teachers take this approach. Like, for example, take a look at your syllabus and note how many of these writers are white men, and think about what kind of themes are in these books. Can you teach those themes with a book that's by a person of color or by a queer person? There are so many books out there. It could be done. Pretty much every syllabus in the country could be populated with queer people, people of color, and even people who are still living, who might be willing to give interviews to the class and make things more interesting. We can teach poetry in a much more interesting and inclusive way pretty easily. Well, writing is just my niche, so I like to emphasize that a lot, but it's of course not the only thing you can do. Even if you're not an artistic person yourself, just pushing for reform in schools is a big thing, because so many kids, like I was saying, they have limited resources for an art class or for a music class, and a lot of schools even don't have those classes anymore, or they have a limited opportunity to access them. So you don't even have to be an artistic person to be an art activist. Another good way to start would be to just start supporting artists and writers who are people of color, who are disabled, who are LGBT, seeking out those people, supporting small press magazines and small press books. I brought this also as an example. It's a chapbook, which is just a really short book. You can see it's pretty thin, and it's only about 25 pages. These books are really common in the poetry community, and for example, this press that publishes this book, it's called Dancing Girl Press. It's based out of Chicago, and they publish mainly women or femme authors or trans women. So there's just so much out there that you can support. And I think a lot of people don't know about that. Like, Blottercher's free. There's lots of other literary magazines that are free. There are literary magazines that publish only trans writers, that publish only, gay Latino men. It gets really specific. So if you want to show something to your students, or if you want to just educate yourself on something, there's a lot out there to do that with, and it's free.